Good afternoon and good morning to our friends in The Hague. Welcome to the second sessions of today's PGM International Symposium, Traditions in Transition. So this is already the fourth day that we have been discussing, sharing ideas about what traditions can mean and what kind of transition we can do. So today we really have the honor of our friends from Royal Conservatoire, The Hague, to be presenting the ideas of curating the connections, recent curriculum approaches at higher music institutions. And today we have two very important hosts with us. First one is Dr. Paul Craenen from the Royal Conservatoire, The Hague, Netherlands. Paul will be presenting the first part of the sessions, which is addressing the idea of approach at higher music institutions. And don't go away in the second sessions. We will also have the showcases from student contributions, and this will be hosted by Dr. Catherine Koch, the head of master research at the Royal Conservatoire, The Hague. And without further ado, if I can pass this stage to our guest here, our host here, Dr. Paul Craenen, who will be introducing more guests from The Hague today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Anatai. Thank you, Professor Nitivo. And thank you for having us here at this wonderful conference. It's an amazing program. Let me first see if I can share my screen to start with. Is this looking good?
Wonderful, yes.
Okay. Thank you. So, whereas my colleagues and some of our students, or maybe I should say ex-students, I'm not sure about this, will present some research firmly grounded in artistic practice, I will try to connect with the conference of theme in a more general way. So unfortunately, I will mainly talk, so a lot of words, but hopefully this can also function as a kind of introduction to the others. And I would like to reflect on transitions in the musical field from the perspective of higher music education. And I will share some experiences from recent curriculum reforms at the master's level at the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague. Now, thinking about now, just a moment. I see that these images are, should be, okay, like this. Thinking about traditions from the perspective of higher music education should probably start by looking at those institutions themselves as being the embodiment of musical tradition. Most conservatories in Europe have roots deep in the 19th century. The history of the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague goes back to 1826. And therefore, probably these institutions feel the weight of musical and educational traditions a bit more than younger institutions around the world, like the one that is organizing this conference. And on the slide, you see some images of European conservatories. You may guess where they are. At the upper right corner, you see the future building of the Royal Conservatoire. We share this building with some partners. We will move in there in January. But seeing these buildings ultra modern, it's hard to escape the impression of a certain, let us call it weightiness or gravity, or at least an expression of durability, or more positively, reliability. And perhaps not without reason, for I think it is fair to say that without the role of conservatories, classical music probably would not have survived the 20th century. In contrast to the 19th century, when many conservatories in Europe were not yet part of state-funded education systems, and often also had to serve a large amateur market, they began to play a more central role in the professional training of musicians around the turn of the 20th century. They became the gateway to the professional music field, you could say. And as a result, today I do not know many professional musicians in the classical music field who have not obtained some degree in higher music education. And this in itself is an interesting given, as it is not necessarily the case for other musical genres. Many professional pop musicians don't have a music degree, although that is probably also changing these days. And I do wonder what would happen to a genre like jazz music today if you tried to bypass the role of higher music education, if we know that jazz spread in, let's call it, more informal ways, but also commercial ways in the first part of the 20th century. Today, it is fully integrated into higher music education. And actually, this institutionalization has sometimes been used as a criticism, especially in the field of jazz, but also the field of rock, or perhaps even world music today. And the argument then is often that musical cultures lose some of their creativity and social power when they become the object of processes of institutionalization. Now, however, I do not want to use these words in a negative sense today. What interests me is rather the question of where musical traditions can be found in music curriculum and what role higher music education institutes play in their transmission and possible transformation. When we try to locate musical traditions in the curriculum, we must distinguish several layers or dimensions. First, there is, of course, the transmission of the repertoire, which in classical music means musical works. If concerts or festivals or recordings reproduce the repertoire, then the conservatory remains the first place where the expertise to perform this repertoire is transferred. And traditionally, the conservatory also acted as a kind of gatekeeper for what should be included in the repertoire you need to master, to become a professional. Although today we also see a growing influence of online platforms that offer students many more opportunities to discover and suggest musical works for their learning trajectory. We had a teacher last year that did a master research on the impact of online learning, autodidactic learning, also with students in jazz teaching. And I think in particular with jazz music, with music education for children, the impact of the, let us call it the YouTube teacher, is almost inescapable today. And my colleague Irma Kort, who will present today, will probably refer to this as well in her presentation. A second dimension is the medium of the score itself and also recordings. The concept of a musical work with a more or less stable identity depends heavily on the role of musical notation that allows this work to be identified in a score. The work as a score becomes an object that always requires some interpretation, but also provokes an attitude of respect for what is written, for the intention of the composer or the style period. Hence the concept of werktreue, coined by Lydia Geur in 1992. But in early music education, the score is often considered necessary, but an insufficient source of information, and there it's often supplemented by other sources, such as manuscripts or the study of instruments, historical instruments, or even paintings. Whereas in jazz education, recordings of key performances are often central to the education and are copied by students or transcribed by ear. And that leads to a more oral analytical form of transmission. Now, what I find interesting today is that we see a growing cross-pollination of methods. The famous Beethoven sketch you see at the left from the Opus 111 piano sonata is probably not what a classical pianist would use to start learning to perform this piece. Whereas from an early music attitude, or you could look at this sketch as containing a lot of information that could inform your performance as well. And it's interesting to see that we see a growing interest also amongst classical music students to indeed adopt such methods in their artistic development. Another example is what you see at the right side. It's an early Elgar recording from 1914. And such recordings, early 20th century recordings, are getting increasing interest and attention, also in the classical music field, because these recordings contain a lot of stylistic information about performance traditions that are not recorded in the score, so to speak. And recent research has shown that this information often contradicts current performance styles and habits, and it has become a fairly popular topic also amongst master students in The Hague to adopt almost a kind of jazz method of copying what you hear in these recordings and learn from that. learn for your own performance practice what it means for your interpretation. It's worth emphasizing this embodiment and the role of the instrument plays as well, because more than in other art forms, instrumental craftsmanship seems to be central to the transmission of musical heritage. We could say that the musical instrument constitutes a gateway to musical culture, almost from the moment one takes first musical lessons. And if I may use an example from my own children here, my daughter went to the art school from the age of 6. She liked to draw, so she's in the visual arts. And she did all kinds of things like sculpture, drawing, collage, some media work as well. But only now at the age of 16, she has to choose a specific arts discipline like oil painting. Whereas my son, who is now 14 and is playing the drums and percussion, went to music school around the same age, and he had to choose an instrument from the beginning. So he's playing the drums now for 8 years, and he's almost nothing else. So there seems to be specialization in music education through the choice of an instrument. And I believe that affects the perspective you develop on music culture in general. Because not only does this instrument give you access to active music participation, it also embodies a particular musical culture and repertoire. And as we all know, most instruments taught at our conservatories have not changed that much since the 19th century or before. And actually, this was a bit of a frustration when I was still teaching in music schools 20 years ago. And one of the reasons that I started an experimental music class where we combined classical instruments with self-made instruments, like the boy you see there playing a kind of huge monochord, or installations, or all kinds of objects and electronics. And I'm happy to see that these kind of practices are gaining ground also in amateur education today. It's maybe a bit more difficult at conservatoires unless you are in a department like sonology or something like that. Although I do have a researcher in my research group who is now working on designing custom-made acoustical instruments through using 3D printing methods, and this leads to very different role for the instrument, also in the collaboration between composers and performers. Now, in the context of tradition transmission, we should say something about master-apprentice relationships as well, and in particular when it comes to the transmission of attitudes and behaviors that underpin musical traditions. If I refer to that concept of werktreue, paying respect to the composer's intentions, then in a way this needs a teacher demonstrating and making audible how a specific attitude towards a musical work can make this music work. And I believe these informal and personal relationships can be very rich and also reciprocal. There's a video excerpt here. I like a bit of time, so I will just summarize it. The famous Rubinstein, the pianist, in a master class, listens to a student playing a Beethoven sonata, and then he says like, well, no, I should say what is good or bad or what you should do, but you're playing this much faster than I ever have done. And actually, you are right. I will adapt my playing the next time I play this sonata. So this is possible in that kind of relationship. But the flip side is that these kind of master-apprentice teaching methods tend to be less innovation-friendly, especially when it comes to teaching methods. Research has been done on that kind of relationships, and unfortunately we also had too many examples where this model led to authoritarian and sometimes even abusive situations, like this mentioned in this recent book of Walter Ponce. I will skip this. Well, this brings me to a fifth dimension of transmission, namely the reproduction of specific roles in the musical field. When you apply to a conservatory as a young student, in most cases it means that you choose a program to become a composer or a music educator or a performer. And these identities point to divisions of labor in the musical field that reflect historical developments. Robert Gierdinger's research has recently shown that music education before the 19th century did not distinguish so easily between performance composition and improvisation. And I think this is the case in many other traditions as well. So the gap between those fields is primarily a result of 19th century developments that followed, first of all, the model of the Paris Conservatory, founded in 1794, if I'm right, and the Leipzig Conservatory, founded in 1843. And it's well known that in the Leipzig Conservatory, that really was an example in Germany. Students were really discouraged to engage with creative activities like composition. They had to master the instrument first. Now, I think these gaps are rapidly losing their relevance today. I think that in most conservatories, we expect students to develop creative or improvisational strategies at the basic level, or even basic pedagogical skills. At the left, you see an image from a European joint module with the Royal Conservatoire and other institutions in Europe, and that led to a kind of course for improvisation, mainly for students from the classical departments. And recently, we launched a minor called collaborative music making, open to students from all departments. So that shows that the curriculum is in transition, you could say. And on all 5 levels I discussed here, we can see changes coming, like changes in the relations to repertoire, to media, perhaps also the role of the instrument, teaching methods, and also roles and functions in the musical field that are embodied by the curriculum. Now, what if we try to visualize this transition a bit? Well, wait a minute, it's not the full screen I see. I have to redo this, so that's better, yes. So it's not very successful what I do here, but I try to visualize in a very simple way the alt model, let's say. If you see here in blue, let us call this the higher music education institution. And if we read this model from the top down, then you see that this institution has a role to play in the society, in the cultural field of transferring heritage, knowledge and expertise, innovation. And if you look at those institutions, how they organize themselves, look at their websites today, and you look a bit beyond the bachelor-master framework, then probably you will find first subdivisions on the level of department and faculties, which are related to musical genres like jazz or classical, or probably also functions in the musical field like education or composition. And within these faculties, students have to make a choice for a main subject, in classical music mostly instrument. So what is typical for this model is that it implies a kind of stepwise legitimation or authority from the top down, with the result that a classically trained trumpetist or pianist not automatically has artistic authority in a neighboring department, like a jazz department, as a pianist or a trumpetist. Another consequence is that a student in this model has no direct access to the world, to society, to cultural field, or even the musical field, unless he or she takes into account all the intermediary steps. So making sure that she masters her main subject before engaging with society. And this model works well, we could say, as long as there is a kind of taken for granted flow of legitimation from the top down, or if this very instrument-based perspective on music feels satisfying to students and relevant. This is not necessarily the case anymore. From the top down, we see all kinds of doubts and tensions. Politicians starting to doubt publicly or question publicly the relevance of the arts, In the cultural field, we have the decline of cultural authority, of the Western canon or the repertoire, with as a result aging and changing audiences, rapidly changing professional prospects, with the result also that the roles and functions embodied in the curriculum lose their relevance. They are no longer sufficient to build a professional career. And I have already mentioned the growing impact of online platforms that challenge traditional master-apprentice teaching methods. But equally important, we notice also in The Hague that students feel the need to connect, for instance, with other disciplines or peers from other disciplines or social issues in much more direct ways. And I think Noppaker, one of our students, will give an example of such a connection with other disciplines in his presentation. And this raises the question of how curriculum can provide more direct connections between fields of expertise, genres, cultural environments, and so on. And in fact, quite a few developments since the beginning of the millennium, or even a bit before, can be considered answers to this question. We've known the introduction of, just a moment, see if this works, yes, academic and reflective skills, the so-called musician as a reflective practitioner, the value of lifelong learning embodied by the research in the curriculum. We know also the introduction of entrepreneurial skills, that the idea that the musician today also is a kind of risk taker in society and needs other skills to do this, and these skills need to be developed in the field itself. You have to go outside to develop these skills. You need to call this professional integration today, and René Jonker, who will present after me, is the head of this department in The Hague. There is also more attention to cater to the individual preferences or interests of students through more what I would call modularity in the curriculum, all kinds of elective courses that also can feed into the research. I have already given these examples of like new improvisation courses, places where students meet from other beyond departments to improvise, to create together. I think this is quite familiar also in other institutions today. And one of the results for the old model is that it enters new horizontality, also coming from the outside, like these entrepreneurial or academic skills. But maybe more important is that it gives new agency to students to more directly follow their interests, for instance, through the research or through professional integration, and to connect with other fields. And in a way also bypass this in this stepwise flow of legitimation in the old model. Well, and in a way this also can cause some tensions and frictions if you bypass the flow of expertise. And well, there have been all kinds of answers to this. But in a nutshell, what I would say is that the result of this model is that the flow of expertise becomes more complex. The picture becomes more complex. This is not new, but what is pressing today is the need to arrive to new curriculum concepts. If you look at to this picture, new concepts that reflect this new emphasis on modularity, autonomy of the student, emerging areas of expertise, the growing importance of social and civic engagement, and so on. And what we came up with in The Hague is what we call the master project. And this master project proposes a different kind of triangle. It's a triangle where the student is at the center. Well, here is the master project. We should see here a real student, but okay, that's what I got. And the purpose of this master project is that you put a student at the center, and the student becomes a kind of architect of a project that combines their artistic development, their main subject, with research and with professional integration activities. And we expect them also to make a proposition, to propose a project where those three elements connect with each other and affect to each other in almost a kind of feedback loop. My colleague Catherine Koch will be able to tell a bit more about this later. But I would like to zoom in onto one aspect of a first evaluation we made of this new curriculum. We have been doing this now for 2 years, and we have tried to monitor the process as good as possible. And the fact that the new master project gives so much ownership to the students also gives us some tools to better listen to their motivations. We expect the students to submit a so-called master project proposal after the first semester. And in this proposal, they also define their vision on their artistic development, their future, in connection with the artistic development, research topic, professional integration. And what I did is analyze 124 of these proposals of last year. I see there's a typo here. And what struck me is that in more than half of them, students include a strong extra-disciplinary focus in their research or in their professional integration activities. So that means something that bypasses what you could expect from their discipline, from their main subject. So it seems that this new structure enhances, stimulates something that already was present in research before, but stimulate making connections to other fields, to other environments as well. It enhances a kind of sense of adventure, I would say. Of course, we also have these other group, so it's not for all students. We have almost half of the students that also still focus very strongly on becoming the best performer or composer. But let us look to these more extra-disciplinary focused students. What are their motivations? Well, they say that what they need is more than skills to become just this good performer. Or I like the second quote, which is really telling. I will continue to develop as a classical guitarist, but I think it's time for me to develop as a musician in other areas as well. It's almost as if there is an opposition between that very instrumental perspective on music, being a craftsman or a woman, or becoming a musician that seems to be, well, maybe a bit more a kind of artistic profile. I don't know, but it's interesting that this is mentioned like this. If you look at what that actually means, those extra-disciplinary topics, it's equally spread over connecting with other artistic disciplines, might also be academic disciplines, or making musical crossovers, or what I mentioned before, bridging the gap of being a performer, an improviser, or a composer. Artistic crossovers can go from visual arts to dance or acting to poetry, which was quite a kind of popular topic last year in the research projects. Sorry, it doesn't work here. Yeah. Musical crossovers go all directions, I would say, from classic to jazz, early music, traditional forms of music. I like the second quote. Since I'm a jazz pianist with a Japanese and Austrian background, I felt always attracted to cultural mixes in music. I'm investigating the possibilities of applying traditional Japanese music in jazz, or the other way around. What I find interesting here is that this new curriculum approach not only seems to stimulate adventure, but also the possibility to reconnect with traditions, or maybe with cultural identities, in ways that probably were not so self-evident before. And what I also noticed is that many of these students feel a kind of responsibility for their own cultural identity, or they want to contribute to their own culture, like this quote, I want to provide something new to the culture of the Canary Islands, or the piano student that wants to make an impact on Vietnamese piano culture after graduating in The Hague. So what I found interesting in all these motivations, these proposals, is that there are all kinds of forms of engagement to be found. I did also a kind of analysis on this, and many of these students indeed see a future for themselves as a music ambassador for a particular kind of music, their instrument, or maybe also a tradition. And they also do this by teaching, want to do this by teaching or coaching, or by innovating the concert practice. They have all kinds of innovative proposals. And also a topic like the audience perspective is becoming much more important. And I mentioned roots and identity. Also topical issues slowly come more to the foreground, like environment, gender, interculturality. And local engagement is also something I just mentioned. So to conclude, we are quite happy and intrigued by these first results after 2 years. It seems to create a new dynamic. Although we have to check with the students, and we have 2 students who are of the first generation, Nobakar and Alessandra, who will present today. But we also have a lot of questions to be solved. Our main question is, I think, the institutional responsibility. We give a lot of responsibility to students now, but what does that mean for us as an institution? Where is our responsibility for the learning trajectory of the student? Catherine will tell more about this. We try to surround the student as good as possible with all the experts we have, starting with the main subject teacher, of course. But it's definitely an interesting question. We also try to make better use of peer learning. We are doing some experiments with this, also some research projects. How can students learn from amongst themselves? And how can we make better use of the cultural diversity we have? We have a very international community of students. They come from all around the world. How can we make use of that in their learning trajectory, make use of that richness? We try also to be attentive for what I would call emerging clusters of expertise, new connections to other fields of expertise. We do this, for instance, by having more specific topics of what we call master circles, that are environments, monthly meetings where students share their progress with peers, and we give that now a bit more focus, like we have a master circle focused on music in the public domain, for instance. I think a main question for the future will be, what are the new emerging professional qualities in these new approaches that we have to also to assess at a certain moment? I think this is a very open question, and one that I cannot answer today, but especially in a kind of professional environment or institution that is also addresses vocational perspectives, we really have to address that question. What are the new professional qualities of the future, and how to assess them? And sometimes we don't have the answer. And I think at that moment it's really important to be able to rely on what I would call trustworthy networks of knowledge and expertise. We don't have to reinvent the wheel at all times. We have already a huge network of institutions we collaborate with, also starting with the University of Leiden. But I think we can even make better use of perhaps one of the few positive outcomes of this pandemic. It's what is happening here today. Is the fact that we can share so easily expertise. If there is somebody in Thailand with an expertise on multisensory music making, why should we search in The Hague if there is somebody over there? We can make that connection, we can share. We could perhaps create new networks for research supervision. That's just like one idea. So, well, let me close with that kind of open invitation, enough of talking now. And if there are any questions, please put them in the chat. And after the talks of René Jonker, who will present right now, and Irma Kort, we will hopefully have also some time for a live chat. So thank you very much. If you would like to contact me personally, this is also my email address. So I will stop share. There you go. So I would like to give the floor to René Jonker now.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Good afternoon, Thailand. And thank you very much, Professor Anatai Nitimon, for inviting us in your wonderful conference. I'm invited to present, to reflect, let's say, on the theme of your conference from the perspective of my research that I only recently finished. Maybe this is, you may be surprised that somebody with gray hair like me recently finished a master research that may need a little bit of context. When I graduated in 1983 as a percussionist, classical percussionist, we didn't have this master bachelor structure, and there was no research in our program. We were just prepared to become either a music teacher or, as in my case, to become a performer. Now, I'm very grateful to our school that our institution has offered the opportunity for gray-haired teachers like me and not so gray-haired teachers like Irma to do a master's in order to also do research. And I think that's a great privilege, and I benefited enormously from it. And it's very nice to see, to be in the company of other master students that are basically our students, like Napakorn and Alessandra, going through the same trajectory. And it helps you to, again, to sympathize enormously with the work our students are doing. The other side, if you are allowed to do research at, let's say, my age, it enables you to, let's say, to put your own tradition into a certain perspective. My research question circled around the relation, let's say, language and music. I know it's a big theme. To what extent is music maybe a language? To what extent can music be the carrier of meaning, if at all? Of course, then there's a huge repertoire of literature. There is philosophy, there is music cognition, there is linguistics, there is, well, I started drowning in, let's say, that part of the research, until at some point I thought, well, if I'm looking for meaning, if music can be the carrier of meaning, I should focus on meaningful moments. And only then it occurred to me, let's ask the musicians that produce, that create these meaningful moments, what they have to say. And I started interviewing around 15 different colleagues of musicians that I knew, that I isolated some really meaningful moments. And I started asking them, okay, and especially if I invited them to listen again, to rehear those performances, sometimes performances that took place 40, 80 years ago, and these musicians never heard back the recording, or 10 years ago. And in this process of stimulated recall, it was amazing how precise musicians were to describe basically what their intentions were in the music making. Now, before I'm going to show you some examples of that, the title of my research became, "What is the word when musicians speak?" The musicians I interviewed, they all basically came from, they represent different traditions. Like the violinist Vera Betts, she performed Alpenberg's Violin Concerto, now an iconic work of the 20th century. I interviewed the jazz drummer Han Benning, who by himself is the co-founder of what is now called Dutch swing, an established style of free improvisation, a tradition, one could say. Geert Koertaak, who I interviewed at his age of 95, he had to become 90 before he could finally write an opera. Now, speaking of tradition, opera is one of the most traditional forms of music, of presenting music, and it has its own canon. I interviewed Jordella Botry, a Ghanaian musician, speaking about his music that is loaded with tradition, the tradition of the Iwi people in sub-Saharan Africa. And I interviewed soprano Viola Chang, born in Hong Kong, who had this very interesting story about, since Cantonese, as many of you may know, is a tone language. She told me that in some pop songs made in Hong Kong, the melody comes first and only then the suitable lyrics can be found. I found that really interesting. So these 15 musicians, they impressed me deeply because they basically spoke about their intention in making the music. They didn't speak about the expression. The expression is, let's say, a consequence of the intention, but it was merely the intention that they put in using the medium. I will start with an example that needs a little bit of introduction. One of the programs we have developed in our school is a program called Music and Dementia, in which musicians go into a residential home and create music with 8 residents, people that have severe dementia. And they co-create music. So the residents are invited to pick up an instrument, or sometimes a conductor's baton, and that is the starting point for a musical improvisation in which the residents are actively engaged in making music. And what we are going to see is a fragment of a particular moment where an older gentleman, Mr. N, has been given the baton, the conductor's baton, to conduct Lucy Payne, a cellist, in an improvisation. Maybe it's just, I'll start the video and then I'll give a little bit of context. What is interesting to know is that this is the 5th session in a succession of 8 sessions, and in none of the previous sessions Mr. N had spoken because of the aphasia he was suffering from in his state of illness. I'm now going to share screen. Hopefully that works. I have to optimize this. Yes. What was amazing about this moment is that after Mr. N finished, and very clearly finished, his conducting Lucy Payne, he gave back the baton and started a conversation. He started to speak in English, and he didn't stop speaking. And that was absolutely an incredible moment. And apparently through making music, something was activated again. And he kept speaking for the remaining 3 months that he lived. And his family explicitly gave us the permission to use this short recording to show to the world what the effect can be if people with severe, in this case aphasia, but also severe dementia, are engaged in a musical process. Mr. N, was no longer a patient, he was in demand. He was leading as he was used to do in his life. Now, this is maybe a striking example of a meaningful moment in music. And it was so interesting to interview Lucy, the cellist, because she could really, 7 years later, after this was taking place, she didn't know that it was a recording. She could really recreate her intentions, trying to translate the intentions of Mr. N, the conductor, into music. And the fact that he was so clear about the ending of the piece, she really could follow his intentions and interpret that in her improvisation. What we know from neuropsychology is that let's say the neural networks that are needed to create music, to be engaged in active music making, overlap largely the neural networks needed for speech. A very interesting field for research. So there may be an explanation for this particularly meaningful moment. I'm moving to another example, and this relates a little bit to what Paul Craenen introduced as one of the elements in our education. I take you to a masterclass that students from the classical department took to learn to improvise. So what you will see at the right-hand side of the screen, our students engage in all kinds of improvisations. But for this occasion, we have invited an audience of young people from a school nearby, young people with a background of being, let's say, second generation immigrants. Most of them have a different cultural background, and they are not at all conditioned by the conventions of our Western classical music. In fact, for most of the kids, it was the very first time they saw a grand piano or a violin being played for them. The challenge for the students to improvise was to improvise something on a given subject by the audience, the kids in the audience. I'm going to share screen again, and hopefully I can quickly find. Yep. Here we go. Ja, en de viool. En welke viool, Helena of Loes? Je mag kiezen. You're the componist. Ja, dus Loes en Loes en de piano. En waar moeten we het over hebben? Wat is het onderwerp? Helpt iemand een idee? Waar gaat uw gesprek over? Ze gaan trouwen. Ze gaan trouwen. Oké. Maar is het al afgesproken of gaat hij haar vragen?
Hij gaat haar vragen.
Hij gaat haar vragen. Oké. You're going to ask Loes to marry? Really something for later. So, if I'm back with you, yes, here we are. What was striking in this example was that apparently the meaning in the music was absolutely picked up by the young audience, the young people, and I interviewed the Loes and Lester and the other musicians, and they were, for them it was so important that they felt understood in their intentions in the music. The responses of the audience actually gave extra meaning, so to say, to their intentions. Again, they spoke about what they tried to express, so their intentions in the music, and as it was clear, very clear in the response of the young people that this came across. Let's quickly move to another strand in my research, because I had the opportunity to interview György Kurták, the Hungarian composer, now aged 95, to look into one of his pivotal works with the title, What is the Word? A piece that was inspired by the last text of Samuel Beckett, the Irish playwright. Written a year before Beckett died, and a friend sent this text to György Kurták, knowing that Kurták was a great Beckett fan, in an English translation. And not only in an English translation, but this friend, there was also a Hungarian translation, and this was sent to Kurták. Now, Kurták didn't know that this was not the source text, the original text. And what is the word is, let's say, the permutation of only 24 words, repeated in different permutations. And Kurták decided instinctively to set this text for an Hungarian actress, Ildikó Monyok, who didn't have a musical background, but she was a famous actress in Hungary, who, through sad circumstances in her life, lost her ability to speak. She was suffering from aphasia, and her stammering and stuttering became part of the music that Kurták composed for her. And it's an incredible, moving piece. What is the Word? Samuel Beckett, Opus 30B of György Kurták, where her difficulty in expressing herself was part of the music. What Kurták did not know, and that's what I found out when I interviewed him, that the original text was not the English version of What is the Word, but the French version, because Beckett was writing most of his plays first in French, and then later made a translation. The French version, Comment dire, was created in a moment of Beckett's life where he himself was suffering from aphasia. Through a stroke, he lost his ability to speak a year before he died, and he suffered for 2 months. He stayed in a hospital, and he really had to find back the words to speak. Comment dire. I will not spend too much time on that, but if you study the notebooks, the sketches that Beckett made of this first text, it's striking to see how much he struggled with finding back the meaning of words. What's even more striking, not only in the French original text, but also in the English translation he made himself, and that was the text that Kurták used, that the subject, there are verbs, but the subject that is speaking, the I, the me, the us, is missing. There is no subject in the text. And that apparently, and this is also what you read in the literature about aphasia, the person who has lost the words, the person who has lost the meaning, the possibility to express herself or himself in words, will also lose the sense of identity, the sense of me, the sense of who is speaking. And I had very interesting conversations with Kurták about it, because he didn't know this, but he picked up on this intuitively. And this led to, let's maybe one the main findings of my research, that apparently that what is the word is not a question, but what is the word? There is no question mark in Beckett's text, by the way. What is the word? The intention of the musician is maybe what it's all about, but you cannot disconnect that from the who that is speaking. Now, I would say this is good news for tradition, because that would mean that even in the recreation of music, if Alessandra is going to talk about her two-piano repertoire, or if Norbert Cohen is going to talk about repertoire that they may perform coming from a tradition, it can only become meaningful if they, the musicians, give it a certain intention. The music of the tradition has to be recreated. I think that's the best news for today for tradition. But that also means that if we apply this insight to the concept of tradition, the best thing that can happen to the tradition is that we ask tradition to speak up to get an answer, and not to speak up asking for conservation. What I learned from listening to these musicians is that the word most needed for tradition is transition. That's what I wanted to contribute today to the theme of your conference. I don't think there's much time left for questions, but as Paul suggested, I'm very happy to answer questions if you put them in the chat. And thank you.
Thank you, René, for such a wonderful presentation. It's not the first time I hear about it, but I think in this context of tradition, it even makes more sense in a way. So thank you for this. So I propose we move forward to our next presenter, who is also a teacher at the Royal Conservatoire in Corte, and also in the situation of she was also in the situation of René, namely that she did a master research project. But I will let her introduce herself. Irma, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul, for introducing me, and thank you, Anotai Nibeton, to invite me and to share our research and profession here. I'm going to share my screen to go through some of my research, but I'll start with introducing myself. So, my name is Irma Kort. I'm an oboe player, a music teacher. I'm a parent of 2 girls. I love animals. I like taking long walks. I like reading books, and I'm very interested in archaeology. Now, this is a very personal introduction, and I did it because during my research that I did over the last 2 years, I found that as a teacher, you're the most important example for your students. So what you are as a teacher and as a person is reflecting on what your students think a musician is, or how they live and what they are as a person. Also, the personal presence online in a blended classroom that I used during my research was very important for students to become involved in the online environment. So as soon as there was personal presence of me and personal presence of the students, they started becoming involved and active in the online environment. Now, my research was based on the question, how can autonomy and active learning be stimulated in a blended oboe class program? And what I was looking for was more an increased intrinsic motivation of my students. Why? Because they have a lot of things they can do these days, and they are very busy, mostly most of the time with extracurricular activities. My research was based in the basis classes for young learners at the School for Young Talent at the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague. So these were, that was an age group of 7 to 12-year-old kids that started to play the oboe, in my case. My own story is one very much where there was, during my studies, a very little autonomy. So there was a master-apprentice relationship. When I was 10, I got my first oboe with a reed and a book, and I was supposed to do a chapter every week, and I had to be able to perform from this book every week during the lesson to go on to the next chapter. And my study didn't really change this. So of course the repertoire got more difficult, but it was very much based on a set repertoire that I had to follow, and it was all working towards an orchestral career. After that, I got an orchestral career and an ensemble career, but there again, programs were set, and I had to follow instructions of either artistic directors or conductors. So it seemed there was very little autonomy in this practice. I used the self-determination theory in my research to look at how I could motivate students and how I could engage them in their development, and how I could support them in their general well-being. And the self-determination theory has 3 focus points. It needs to be supportive in autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Autonomy in this learning theory means that the behaviors are self-endorsed and they are congruent with one's authentic interests and values. Relatedness is all about feeling cared for by others, and competence is the basic need to feel effective in the mastery of goals. Autonomy, I found in my students, came very much from their own cultural background. I have a very international group of students, and they all take their own cultural background and their own cultural music with them, meaning music from their religion, music from their festivities during the year, which are very different from Chinese students than they are from Dutch students, for example, or English students. Then there is a family that has an enormous input on what children listen to when the radio's on, when they are in the car, which concerts they attend, what programs they watched on television. At the age of 10, most children here have devices, digital devices. So they have their own social media network, and the algorithms of these networks make them see things that they are interested in. And most of the students I found are on YouTube, Spotify, Snapchat, Instagram, and a lot of them are on TikTok. And they get a lot of information and a lot of musical styles from these networks that they want to apply to their music making. And they watch a lot of films. My students, almost everybody loves anime films, and there are a lot of children that watch animation films. And of course they have the regional youth programs on the television. Now, to use an autonomy supportive teaching style, I used a reciprocal dialogue, meaning that there is a teacher and a student, and they both give input in the program, content-wise and process-wise. So the student comes from their background and has a lot of input on repertoire, songs they want to study, that they want to show to their peers. They can make their own challenges. They're really great at that. And that's almost just created by watching TikTok. And then there is their informal repertoire, their children's songs, their children's games, and the songs from their cultural background connected to festivities. And again, the family input is very important. As a teacher, I connect all their information to what I know from my traditional classical background in skills and in steps that they have to take when they want to learn to play the oboe. And I connect it to repertoire that I know, classical repertoire, to make them and get a broader horizon. I divide the process in goals and sub-goals, and I give them regular feedback. And so together we build a program, and we add content, and we create a process together. For example, S is a student, and she's a real student, and she wanted to play Arietti's song. This is a song that comes from the anime film, Studio Ghibli film Arietti, which is very beautiful and has a wonderful score, musical score. And I, as a teacher, have to know or find out that it is in a 3/4 measure that is being played in A minor and D minor. It goes up for the oboe from a low D to the high C, and it has a very simple harmonic schedule. Now, together with this information, we create a project. She knows the song and I know what needs to be learned. So I make sub-goals and we create a project together by improvising, practicing small skills, technical skills, by using a lot of different perspectives like theory and solfa, rhythm language, reading, writing, embodiment, so moving the music. And I connected to classical repertoire, which I connected this song to Vaughan Williams as the Lark Ascending, which is a beautiful violin solo that we explored on our instruments. Then we start composing and creating, and we make a project. And a project could be a concert, a video presentation that can be shared with friends and family, and we record it. After sharing it with friends and family, we reflect on the feedback that the student got, and we reflect on the complete process. And we take what we've learned into a next process or project. To come to the second focus point of the self-determination theory, I looked at relatedness, and relatedness, I just discussed the relatedness between the student and the teacher, which you can see here in the middle. Now, the second circle is the one of the family, and the family is very important in a young student's practice because they can help facilitate the practice by creating a weekly agenda with an overview of all the extracurricular activities in the school hours, and then the student can see where there are gaps in the schedule where they could have a practice session. What is very important here, that also again the communication is based on autonomy supportive parenting, so they can parents are only allowed by me to facilitate, but the process and the decision making is all within the student. The circle around the family is the circle of the peers, the P. The peers are the school classmates or the other members of the ensemble or orchestra that they that they go to or they attend. And I make very consciously the decision to create presentation possibilities within the school for their instrument so that they can feel very proud of their instrument. And I also help them with trying to perform on celebrations or birthdays and holiday events, so that they have their with their instrument, they have this connection to their culture, and the peers can be positive and supportive about that. Outside from the peers is the wider community, which is of course the live performance community, but also the internet community these days. And for young kids, I do think it is very important that parents are involved with anything they do online, and they put online, not to control what they want to put online, but to check the feedback that comes from the as reactions to anything that is public. Why? Because I think they should be able to value feedback before it is given, and it's hard for young learners to value negative feedback the way they could or should. The competence part of the self-determination theory I tackled with implementing quality practice, which is a great learning theory by Susan Williams, a wonderful colleague of mine at the Royal Conservatoire. Quality practice is all about the ability to plan, the ability to practice, to create an overview, and to reflect on the process. I also used self-efficacy, and that refers to the set of beliefs that we hold about our ability to complete a particular task. And I used gamification, which simply means using aspects of games in a teaching practice. Now, to go on with quality practice, part of the quality practice was the agenda I mentioned in the family. So together with students, we make a weekly overview of what they are doing and what tasks they have, school and hobbies. And we try to fill in gaps where they can have their practice sessions. When they start playing, they use logbooks, and logbooks are just used for dating when the practice session is happening, the time it is happening, and how they feel. So they check on their energy level, and according to that, they make a plan of what repertoire they want to play or want to focus on. And when they are playing, they use a repertoire sheet that you can see on the right here. A repertoire sheet is basically a rubrics. So they look for their, they are describing their sub-goals in the left column, and they describe more and more sub-goals until they are ready to perform, which is the way they want to make their music sound on the right column. They describe their sub-goals and end goals themselves. And sometimes I give them process enhancing hints. During their practice, they use the purple pictures and the orange pictures. The purple pictures are strategy cards, and the orange pictures are creative solution cards. They also have these in a card deck. These connect to active learning. Active learning I implemented to give students choice, so to give them autonomy in their process. And I gave them lots of choices by introducing these cards, the strategy cards, the creative solution cards, the smart things to do cards, and the self-care cards. Now, the strategy cards are all about the preparatory learning functions. So what a student needs to do or decide to in advance of actually starting the action of practicing. When they are in the practice session, they often use creative solution cards. They bump into a challenge, and then they can use these options And open cards are their own cards, of course, and their own ideas to help them get through the challenge and make a step in their sub-goals. These are all executive learning functions. Later on, I added smart things to do, because there are a lot of smart things to do when you practice, like being kind to yourself, or thinking of a reward. When you think, when children think they have to do something very difficult, they start to procrastinate. And if they think of rewards, they are more likely to start the process and dive into the difficult bits. And of course, there's self-care. I think self-care is very important from a very young age, because later on it prevents students from having mental problems, negative thoughts, or injuries. In my research, I used a flipped classroom, and a flipped classroom is a blended learning environment where live lessons are connected to an online environment. In the live lessons, children come across challenges, and during the week, I fill up the online environment with tips, hints, tutorials, puzzles, assignments, cooperative projects, to get little instructions on how they could tackle their challenges and get further during the week. So the practice process is ongoing, and it doesn't go from lesson to lesson. When children have problems planning their sessions, I make appointments with them during the week in their free periods, and I start their online lesson, their practice session with an online lesson of a 10 or 15 minute small lesson where we discuss what they are going to do and the options that they could use to start the practice and develop. Aspects of gamifications in the lessons were using the fantasy aspect of a game. In a game, children can practice, they can play, they can use their imagination, they can explore, and it's a safe environment. It doesn't have any outcomes in the real world. It stays in the space online. And I want my students to feel as safe and as explorative and playful within their music practice when they're at home, and also in the lesson, of course. To trickle curiosity, I send them little messages, reminders, little funny exercises or challenges during the week to keep them going and to make it fun and playful. They always stay in control of their process when they practice. So I don't control their practice, they do it. And they come up with challenges and I come up with challenges. If they have sent in an assignment and they're doing really well during the week, I decide to give them another assignment to really, with the next challenge, to really get them up a level in their playing. Game makers use specific profiles of game players: the killer, the achiever, the socializer, and the explorer. And that was interesting for me, especially in group lessons, that you could see different types of students and different types of, when they get autonomy, they react differently, the children. So a killer is someone that really likes to be competitive. And in group processes and in cooperative projects, killers really need to learn how to work together with others. Achievers are people that set their own goals, so they can be slightly in their own world. So for them, it's also a challenge to cooperate and to create together. Socializers, on the other hand, they thrive when they can do things together and they can learn things together. And explorers are really interesting in groups of students because they come up with new thoughts, new material, new skills, and new solutions to whatever any of the students is bumping into. And the reward system in games, in my practice, really, really worked well. Because if you write down all the achievements and the rewards connected to that in the shape of medals online or achievement lists, they really, it's a very high intensive for motivation, and it increases motivations a lot. I also use it in my life lessons by giving students achievement cards. So at the end of a project, they have a whole set of cards of skills they've learned, theory they've learned, repertoire they've played and performed, and how they reacted on the feedback and what they're going to take into the next process. I found that teaching in this autonomy supportive fashion made my music practice as a teacher far more creative than it was before. And the students developed into creative musicians. They had ownership over that process. It increased their motivation. They became even happier than they already were as in their music making, and they became very positive about their own music making and their creative process. And they started this process of being self-regulating in their music making. Well, this is my question page, so if there are any questions, I think there's still time to share questions and answer.
Thank you, Irma. Yes, indeed. I think we can move on to maybe a short question and answers session. We still have like 10 minutes or maybe more like 15 minutes to give enough time also for the next session with Catherine and the students. So, well, looking around a bit, it could be questions also for René or maybe even for myself. Are there any questions around, or would somebody like to take the word?
Okay. In that case, if I can jump in briefly together with you. Okay. I really like the ideas of transmissions and tradition. Thank you so much first. Sorry, I'm always skipping this. Thank you so much for all the wonderful presentation you have made. And thank you, René, for reminding us that tradition, this is a good time for tradition to learn about how important transition is within it. So thank you so much. And of course, Irma, this is, even though it's the second time, I'm still very impressed of a lot of work that you have put together in working with these 5 cycles from the students outside to the community. So this is really wonderful. There's a lot of energy you have put into it, and very impressive. And thank you, Paul, for addressing that so vividly, the transmission of tradition, that 5 challenges about the repertoire, the scores, the idea of instruments, as you mentioned, that we have to choose. And you can often hear, like, when, for example, when students arrive in schools and they have to introduce themselves, they always introduce their name and then their instruments immediately, as if it is a kind of family name in some way. So that's something of a musician. I am something and then a pianist. I'm something and then followed by the instrument. So that's quite clear. And also the ideas of teaching methods, the apprentice idea, that is always challenging, especially when it comes to like Southeast Asia, where we already have a very strong sense of this apprenticeship. It can often turn into a bad ending. So this is and the roles of function. That's also something that we really kind of suffer, even though in traditional music in Thailand, those roles are always combined. So I'm asking back, do you think that these 5 topics that you have mentioned, is it a recent realization that is problematic, or has it been there for a while already?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I do think it's nothing new. Anything I've discussed is it would be bit pretentious to claim that we are now in the moment where we can change everything, like and have a kind of revolution of music education. It's also a messy process, I think. So things evolve and develop in many ways, and also it's not very clear how it goes. But indeed, I just, when you invited me, like, well, try to introduce this a bit from this perspective, and looking at the curriculum reforms we are doing, then you cannot escape looking at all kinds of developments that come from different angles and then come together somewhere to a new kind of concept. And indeed, what struck me again also in Irma's presentation is this, that so many of these concepts seem to be the concepts of today, or at least the ideas or the ideals of today's world, like, or at least a part of the world, because we could discuss that as well. But this notion of the importance of the connections of identity, autonomy, ownership, such a big issue today. So all these things have come to the forefront. They were not there 30 years ago in my memory, in my impression. And I think all these things together indeed lead to to the situation we are in now, and where I think we are also looking for new ways to, what I try to explain, to conceptualize where we are, where we try to come up with a new kind of image of what actually are we doing. What is the concept of education? What is so? And I don't think we already have the answers. We have many big words, like all these words like self-regulated and so on and so on. Sometimes I'm also a bit fed up with all those big words, but it's a sign of the times. And yes, I think we are in this transition. That's basically what it is. And transitional phases are typically phases where you don't know yet where to go, and maybe afterwards we will say like, oh yeah, of course, that was what was happening. But yet I think those topics are really on the agenda, and they pop up in many different ways, in teaching, in how we address music, in how we relate to media, and we start to question anything we did before we did. So yes.
Anything to add, Renee and Irma? On that point, do you like? Can you imagine, like maybe 10 years ago, that these will pop up as the questions that needs answer?
Well, I didn't expect it. No, personally not, because but it is also not far from what it was. If you look at autonomy supportive teaching, it still comes like 50% of the teaching is still my own background, which was very traditional, and of course which I use, and I use to develop myself as a musician. So it is not, it is using this tradition to make the horizon of students broader than it is, as it was when I was young, and my teacher was broadening my horizon. I think it's just in a different sort of dialogue that it's happening.
Yes. And Renee?
Well, if I look back at my own learning as a student, it may have been a little bit different, because I was so much involved in contemporary music, and To the extent, well, research was not zero in my time, but my professional integration almost took over 80% of my study program, so to say. I was more outside the school than inside. And therefore, I had a quite strong sense of ownership of my learning, which I now come to realize was quite special. I got away with a very low note on my final recital, because my technique was not as much as developed. But I think the way Paul has described it, we are making a lot of progress. But I think that the reflective part, the let's say, which is very much stimulated by the research, is so much more important, and it's a large part also in the self-steering and self-regulation that Irma has integrated in her teaching. But asking yourself the questions that need to be asked has become more and more relevant in our music education, I think.
Thank you so much. I think that's more of start asking questions, right? So I'm going to bring in Catherine now. So thank you so much for the answer. That's a good reminder of where we are, and that we need to realize it in order to go forward in the future. So thank you. I'm going to return back to Paul. Thank you.
Okay. Now, shall I take over the next slot, Paul? Yes, great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Keynote, for your invitation to speak at this exciting conference. And it's also a great pleasure of mine to be able to take two of our recent graduates with me to this conference to demonstrate what we are working on in our master program. Let me go share my screen now. Okay, can everyone see that? Is that okay? Great. All right, I am head of the Master Research Program at the Royal Conservatoire, and in that capacity, I get to know all of our master students throughout the 2 years of their studies in terms of the research that they do. Now, it's important to say that this is not necessarily only academic research, but we consider it artistic research, and in that facet, it incorporates all different aspects of doing research. So there is an academic level to it, but there's also a very artistic level to it. And what I would like to do now, and it's quite a challenge to talk for only 15 minutes about something I could speak hours about, is to sort of sketch the scene that so that when our students talk to you in a little while, that you have an understanding of what they went through in the past 2 years. So what our students do in the 2 years that they're with us is a master project. Now, Paul briefly mentioned that in his keynote. A master project is in fact a triangle of 3 aspects of their studies that we find very much work together. And each student will focus differently on one of these points of the triangle. And these 3 aspects are artistic development, research, artistic research, and professional integration. And our goal as educators, our goal as an institution, of course, is to provide students with the tools to make them successful in whatever career they choose to take on after they leave us. And we feel very much that these 3 aspects are very important in being successful: becoming a reflective practitioner, being inquisitive and curious about why you do certain things, and developing the skills to be able to make the next step beyond school, which for many students is a very daunting prospect, especially at this challenging time. Now, I thought it would be interesting to briefly highlight what these 3 aspects are in the program. I think it's important to emphasize that we think of it as a triangle, but of course it should be some other form, because for some students, different points on the triangle are longer or broader or bigger than others. So some students will actually have much more of an emphasis on research than professional integration. Some students will make an enormous jump in their artistic development during the 2 years with us, and research might take a smaller part of that, and into professional integration as well. So artistic development, of course. If you go to a conservatoire, you're there to develop your art. We hope that when students enter the master program and they really have an understanding of what they can achieve in those last 2 years, how they can create their artistic voice to be successful in whatever they embark upon next. In the artistic aspect, artistic development aspect of the program, the teacher of their main subject or their main department, of course, plays a very large role as coach, as mentor, as inspirer of anything that they want to develop on. And also developing a vision, which for some students can be quite a challenge. We just saw in the presentations before this, where we are coming from, the traditions that we come from. I also was trained as a pianist. I was not tyrannized by my teacher, but it was very much, there was definitely a hierarchy in that relationship. I'm now an early musician, an early keyboard specialist, very much involved in research. So I did see the development of tradition in my own tuition. So what kind of musician do students want to become? So obviously the main subject teacher plays a large role in that, but also interaction with peers in group lessons, orchestra, projects, other things, other aspects of their program. Who do they want to be playing with and why? What is their artistic voice? So artistic research, artistic development is a very important aspect of our program. Next to that is research, and that's where my responsibilities lie. Research, I sometimes have trouble with the word research. I have a PhD, I have an academic research degree, but we don't mean research purely from the academic side of it. We mean actually what makes you tick as a musician, what makes you wake up in the morning and think, I want to work on that piece. I want to improve my technique. I want to work on improvisation. I want to create a new ensemble. This curiosity, inquisitiveness to be somebody and to have an artistic voice. So we encourage students when they apply to the master program to think of a subject that will keep them going for 2 years, that they'll wake up in the morning wanting to work on. And it will necessarily be related to their main subject. But the beauty of artistic research is that it can be so many different things. It doesn't necessarily have to be about a composer or a piece. It can be about a musical choice. It can be about improvisation, ornamentation. Why do I hold my bow the way I hold my bow? Why do I use vibrato in some music and not in other music? My teacher has been telling me to play a particular style in a certain way for many years. Is that correct? Where can I find information that will back that up, or maybe will help me create a different idea? Now, we don't leave students alone in their research. We help them, we supervise them, we mentor them, we coach them. They receive an introductory course on how to do artistic research. So sort of the nitty-gritty of what are source materials, how do you document the interesting things that you find, how do you put your research in a form that you can disseminate it and share it with others, which of course is one of the most beautiful things about doing research, the network that's around you. Students are given a research supervisor, which is a coach or a mentor who will help them with the process. Anyone who's involved in research knows that you have good days and bad days. Good days, the ideas flow, you can write. The bad days, sometimes you can't really decide which way to go, or you have difficulty finding source materials. So a research supervisor helps with that. And as Paul also mentioned, we also have a series of electives, which are research-based courses on a variety of different subjects to help students not only build their network, but think about what they're doing. Now, students, when they apply to the school, are asked to place their research idea, artistic research idea, in a research area. Now, this is something that Paul came up with several years ago, and it's actually a wonderful aspect of our program that we have students in different research areas, no longer by instrument or by department, but by research area. And these are the research areas that we currently use. So art of interpretation, that might be something that you think automatically is connected with early music, and you would be correct in assuming that. But art of interpretation is also a research area that jazz students function very well in, also classical musicians as well. Music in public space was mentioned earlier. That's actually an aspect of doing research or developing yourself as an artist that all students in some way should be questioning. How am I going to get my musical voice out there? How am I going to communicate by message, by performing? But we also have things such as music theory, educational settings, and in that group are not necessarily only education students, but we have some students from the classical department or even the jazz department who are seeking to develop themselves as educators as well as performers, and might be doing a research topic that combines those two areas, which is great. Creative practice, that can be students. I mean, if I think of what Renee said, you know, working a lot in contemporary music and getting outside of school and being a co-creator in projects. Now their creative practice lies beyond discipline, combining different areas. We had an early music oboe student this past year who was working with a composer and creating new compositions. You could call that crossover, but it's also sort of breaking the boundaries that we normally associate with certain traditions. An area that's very desirable, and many students find themselves in this area, is musical training, performance, and cognition. And that can be everything from you know, health issues when performing, physical, mental health issues, becoming, you know, let's face it, becoming a performer is like being a top sport person. So you need to be very physically fit and mentally fit, but also, you know, how do you communicate to your students? How do you help your students become the best performers that they can be? What do we go through when we learn a piece of music? What aspects do we need to consider when we get on the stage to perform? So these are the 9 research areas that students will be take part in. They will choose one when they apply to the school, and that will sort of be the color or the flavor of their study. Throughout the 2 years with us, they will be in a master circle. I'll come to that in a minute. In one of the areas, they will have a supervisor who is at home in one of these areas, and they will be working with other students who are also interested in this area. I'm not going to spend too much talking about professional integration because that's where we have Renee and his team. But professional integration, of course, is a very important part of our master project, and that would be the 3rd point of the triangle. Professional integration is the idea is to equip students with the skills to get out there and communicate, you know, their ideas to the wider world. So they have to work on professional integration activities, and they have a wonderful introduction course that teaches them some of the harder skills of becoming a performing artist, like making a budget and, you know, organizing yourself and, you know, broadening your network and figuring out how you contact promoters and concert organizers and all these types of things. So the PIA, which is the professional integration activity, is integrated with the artistic research and artistic development. So the idea is that they have a product at the end that incorporates these 3 areas. Now, I think we've been quite successful, and that's probably, we're still working on it. You know, we are in transition, but we've tried to create a network for students to help them in their development in these 2 years. And I think there are 4 important pillars in that network. The main subject teacher remains, for many students, the most important connection that they make at the Royal Conservatoire. Many students choose a main subject teacher because of admiration or appreciation or respect for what they do, but also because they see themselves in the future in a certain area, and that main subject teacher is someone who will inspire them and help them. Research supervisor, who helps them develop their research idea and stays with them the 2 years of the master program to help with all aspects of that. Professional, I'll skip the master circle leader for a minute. Professional integration coach, which helps with the development of all the things that they learned in the introduction course in the first semester, but also helps them develop their professional integration activity. And the master circle leader. Now, a master circle is something that's quite unique to the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague, and I think it's probably best described as a peer group, where students who are in a particular research area come together 8 to 10 times a year, and there's a leader of each of these peer groups, and we call those leaders the master circle leaders. And they have quite a difficult and challenging task because they need to be aware of the 3 points of the triangle and helps students initiate discussion in the master circle about all 3 areas that pertain to their master project. The master circle is a peer group where first-year students and second-year students come together to talk about their master project. We find that students in different parts of their studies can be a source of inspiration that you sometimes don't expect. You have second-year students who might be a little bit stuck and thinking about, the end of their studies and working towards their final documentation. And then you have a fresh group of first-year students who come in and are really happy to talk about developing their master project and therefore can inspire the second-year students, and vice versa. Second-year students have been through part of the program already, know what to expect, know the pitfalls, know the places where people can get stuck, and therefore can offer advice to first-year students. Excuse me. So it's a discussion group, a peer group, where all aspects of the master project are discussed. It's a safe environment where students can be very vocal about how things are going in the master program and with their master project. And in that respect is a very important aspect of our program. Now, we're educators, we are an institution, we are a conservatoire, and like traditions in any aspect of education, there is always the moment when some sort of assessment needs to take place. And that's a difficult area because when you're actually assessing the master project, you in essence are assessing the person themselves, because these people have been working for 2 years to develop a project that's very close to their artistic development and their professional aspirations, and is also connected to research. So it is a very personal thing that we are assessing. However, we do have steps along the way to help students and many guidelines to help them in the process of documentation and dissemination. So students are given the choice. They can create an exposition, which is basically a all-encompassing demonstration of their research results with text, audio, video. Sometimes students draw, or they can create a more academic thesis, because we always have students who are searching to continue their studies through a PhD or a doctorate of some sort, and they are looking to create a more academic text. So there are 2 ways that students can document the research results. And all of these documentations are found on the research catalog, which is an online database where we collect the research results of our students. And we have a wonderful research catalog. Yeah, how would I say that? Kasper Schipper is the person who helps us with the research catalog. He helps students to understand how it works. He helps students with suggestions for, creatively putting their research on there. And it's also a way for disseminating research of the students to the wider world. So we're very pleased about that development. And of course, it's also still in transition, because every year we have students who challenge even the capabilities of the research catalog in their creative desires to put different things on there. Now, students present their research in a research symposium that we hold every year. The past 2 years, it was online. We had the great pleasure to have Anatai join us on the committee, and we're really happy for that. That's how we made this wonderful connection. So you see, even in a time of great difficulty as Corona, we all learn new things and make new connections by having this online forum. So the research symposium is a wonderful chance for students to learn how to talk about their research. So they have to do a 30-minute presentation, hopefully with music behind their instrument and with PowerPoint, and they demonstrate the results of their research to an audience, be it online or live. And we're very aware of students who have made particular efforts in developing both their written work and, for the past 2 years, their video recorded work. So we are also able to award students who have done a particularly notable job with a research prize and a video prize. And I must say, also due to Corona, this year and last year, there were no live presentations. So students were asked to make a video recording of their presentation, and by so doing, learned all kinds of new skills that surpassed even our expectations with PowerPoint and with video and with communicating via social aspects. So, you know, we continue to learn as heads of this program, and we continue to learn as educators and teachers, and our students continue to show us what's possible and the wonderful ways that we can share research and artistic development and professional aspirations with the world. Now, I will not speak too much longer because the highlight of this section of our presentation today, of course, are two graduates, recent graduates of the Royal Conservatoire, who will be presenting their research results to you. And we will have time following their two presentations to have a Q&A should there be any questions about what I have said or anything the students will present. And thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to contact me for anything, then this is my email address, and I look forward to hearing from you. And I think it's time to stop sharing my screen and time to give the floor to our first student, who is Popcorn. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Catherine. So let me briefly share my screen. Okay. Nice. Okay. Do you see me screen well? Okay. So first of all, it is my honor to be part of these sessions, and thank you, Paul and Catherine from the Royal Conservatoire of The Hague for having me. And also thank you, Dr. Anotai, Nitipon, and PGVM faculties and staff for organizing this wonderful event. So my name is Napakon Uasirinukra. I'm a classical guitarist and a former student of the Royal Conservatoire. So for today's sessions, I will give a short presentation based on my master research and project that I have done during my master study during my time spending there at the Royal Conservatoire of The Hague. So this presentation more or less will summarize my whole ideas behind my research topic, which is innovative practice of enhancing musical perceptions. So generally speaking, this research aims to explore other possible methods of curating musical performance by utilizing other human sensories in combination with musical or sound properties to create a multi-sensory experience. The study is not beneficial for music performers or music society, but also for other fields of professions who wish to collaborate with musicians or wish to apply sonic attributes to their practices. So briefly, before diving into my research topic, since it is related to human senses, it is important to begin this presentation with how our senses work together. So we tend to think of the senses as a single unit that separate from each other, but scientific studies from the last decade have confirmed that none of our senses work in isolations. They are in fact consistently interacting and intimately connecting. And in an everyday situations, we get bombarded by many unique sensory signals. And in order to get the most truthful estimations of the environmental features, we combine those sensory units that refer to the same object or event together. And by this neurological fact, the human brain is capable of generating a cross-modal mapping between two or more sensory attributes in a very consistent manner. And scientists have termed this phenomenon as a cross-modal correspondences. The cross-modal correspondences happen autonomously with or without self-consciousness, and many pieces of research on multisensory experience have proved that when two stimuli from two different sensory systems are matching with congruency, it can enhance the observer's experience. And in another way, mismatching the two sensories can ruin the whole experience, so to say. For example, if we are thinking of dining experience, which is the most multi-sensory experience in our everyday routine, there were numerous reports on the experiment about the visual contributions to flavor perceptions, showing that participants have a tendency to complain about off flavor or feeling ill after consuming an inappropriate color food, despite the fact that only difference in the recipe is adding odor and tasteless food dye. And not the effect of the cross-modal correspondences are not only increasing or decreasing satisfaction, but it can also disorient human perceptions in some cases. According to studies, many people will say that a cherry flavored drink tastes like lime if color green and tastes like orange if color orange, which is outstanding. However, these examples that I have mentioned are very rational and foreseeable, since we nearly always see what we are going to eat in advance. Therefore, visual are likely or reasonably dominant over flavor perceptions. There are plenty logical examples of cross-modal correspondences. For instance, in music, people tend to match high-pitched tones with higher placement objects like stars or the mountains, since the general terms of describing musical pitch and vertical placement, which are low and high, are overlapping between two stimuli. On the other hand, there were still many correspondences that seem irrational and abstract, yet still experienced by majority of the people. So for example, please take a look at these two shapes and two meaningless words, kiki and boba. Actually, around 95% of populations agree that the shape on the left side are well matching with kiki, and the shape on the right side are well matching with the boba. Or even people tend to agree that lime is faster than an apple, although the name or the taste of these two fruits has nothing to do with the velocity. Okay, let's come back to my research and project. So in my research and project, I decided to use scientific-based cross-modal correspondences as the main method of conducting a multisensory experience. From my artistic perspective, in this very first step, it is important to rely on scientific assumptions over my own hypothesis, since the study's primary purpose is to enhance audience perceptions. Therefore, using data from well-conducted scientific experiments is more likely for the audience to feel the congruency between two senses, whether with or without extra musical training. Even though the sonic ingredients that were used in this project were based on concrete experiment result, the presentation method was purely based on the basis of artistic choices between myself and my collaborators. And the sense that I chose to pair with music in this research is the sense of taste, which seemingly the most far related to the sense of hearing. However, there are considerable evidence in our history that shows the relation between music and food. Actually, there are several indications, records both in text and paintings, show that since ancient times, humans usually use music in combination with food to fulfill their desire. Even in our musical practice, the word dolce or sweet has been used as a musical expression. Interestingly, as we all know, the word was originally used to represent a taste expression. It is intriguing how we can understand and are able to produce and interpret a sweet sound, even there is no apparent relation between the word and the sound. So specialists on cross-modal relation can identify several congruency connections between sonic attributes and basic taste. For example, sweet taste is well matching with softly played pitches in a higher register and legato way of playing. Also, small melodic intervals and consonant harmony are also important elements to consider for a sweet tonal music. On the other hand, sour has a similar connection with high pitch, but in a very different manner, since the intensity of sourness makes it well match with higher volume, faster tempo, and syncopated rhythm. Therefore, sour music has a lot to do with sudden tension, surprise, and force. Move to the salty. There is not much striking relation between salty taste and sound, but one of the foremost salty sound component is a staccato or articulations or detached way of playing. Lastly, the bitter taste. Bitter is an excellent taste to get along with slower tempo and legato playing, but unlike sweet, bitter are suited best with low pitches. And the combination of these three components create a muddy and heavy sensation music, which represents bitterness. And beyond the taste characteristic, sound volume is directly variable with the intensity of the taste, regardless of which taste it is. If the perceived taste is strong, the loudness of the sound has to increase congruently. So in this research, I decided to work with these 4 basic tastes, but as you may know, there are actually 5 basic tastes that are recognized in general society. There are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. And there is a reason behind why I don't want to include umami in this very first stage experiment. So while 4 basic tastes are widely known and are able to provoke a similar sensual context of affections among a large group of people, umami taste interestingly induce a love-hate reaction based on familiarity with the taste. Therefore, East Asian populations, which are statistically more familiar with umami taste in the local cuisine, are more likely to experience positive emotions from the taste. In the contrast, populations from other regions that are not familiar with umami may find it unpleasant. And this uncertain nature of the taste causes difficulties in identifying a congruent sound character that will be experienced by a large group of people. Then after finding the concrete sonic element matching each taste, I proceed to my next step of finding an effective method to present this multisensory experience to the audience. There are actually various ways of presenting multisensory experience depend on the focal point of your work. But since my project occurs in between the pandemic situations, it arises the ideas of delivering the experience in form of the experimentation that every audience can try it out at their home. So the final result of this project is a semi-theatrical piece called Taste Me for guitar and dining situations in combination with talented Thai composers, Mr. Piyawat Lulaprasert. And this music is divided into 4 parts according to the basic tastes. The performers in this piece is responsible for exploring and personating the guitar sonic behaviors after tasting 4 different taste stimuli, namely the salty potato chips for salty, apple juice for sweet, lime for sour, and concentrated coffee for bitter. And the main reason that I chose this food stuff is I want to use the food stuff that everyone can find in their local grocery store. So it is easier for the audience to engage and have fun with this experimentation. Also, the physical actions of the performers eating the food in this piece are a visual inductions that invites the audience to imitate and eat the food, observe the texture and taste at the same time as the performer does. And finally, feel or not feel the congruency between sonic elements and taste through media performance. So I would love to show you the first part of Taste Me. It will be around 4 minutes. So Dr. Anotai, so thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So after finishing this project, the next step that I would love to progress in the cross-modal journey is to present this multisensory experience between sound and taste to the public audience in a live situations, and also expand the cross-modal relation between sonic with other human sensories. The sense that I find it very interesting is the sense of touch, because touch is a very fascinating sense to work with, since the skin is our largest sensory organ in human. And actually there is some innovations in the market that could enhance the musical experience through the sense of touch. For example, Subha is a portable tactile audio platform that could resonate your body with the music, results in a deeper connection with the musical experience. So let's imagine how fantastic it's going to be if there is a device that could provide a tactile sensation like Subpack, but as well as adjusting our skin temperatures according to the music that we are hearing at the moment. To summarize this short presentation, this research objective is to raise awareness about human senses and how they react and connect. Professor Charles Spence, the head of the cross-modal research laboratory at Oxford University, once said that multisensory turned out to be the norm, not the exceptions. The cross-modal correspondences enable countless possibilities for any career field. In food industry, sonic seasoning is an alternative and upcoming trend in many progressive restaurants that they are working on at the moment. For example, by listening to the high-pitched background music, diners will encounter sweetness enhancement, while listening to a low brass instrument sound will increase diner perceived bitterness instead. This fact creates a linkage between music society and food industries, and hopefully will open up new form of compositions, new form of art, or even new career path in the near future. Or even when we performing or curating a pure music event, it is worth thinking about organizing other senses inductors that might help your audience appreciate your performance more, or at least minimize and eliminate those incongruent sensory elements from your production to maximize the audience experience to the higher level. And for me, this method, cross-modal correspondences, is for sure not the only way to enhance the musical experience, but for me, by working and caring about other sensories and collaborating with the expert in another fields of studies, of course, can open up musical boundaries further with endless possibilities. Thank you for this presentation. So I believe that we will have a Q&A sessions after Alessandra presentation.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Napakorn. That was super interesting. Yes, I think it would be wise at the moment to move on to Alessandra. And so I would love to ask the audience to hold your questions until after that point. I'm sure you have some. And then, of course, we can put them to the two presenters. Thank you so much. Alessandra, are you ready?
Yes, I cannot activate my video. Maybe Anotai has to do it for me. That's it.
You are great. Okay, I'm looking forward to you.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, I want to congratulate Napakorn for his presentation. So we were colleagues during the first year in the master circle, and I remember he was exposing the topic, and I was wondering how would he progress in this research. So I'm very happy that now I saw the output of the research, and it's very nice. Congratulations. Well, my research is much more traditional, just to stay in the topic of the symposium. So I will first share the screen and then I'll start talking. Okay. One second, please. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Yes, so good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, maybe better. Hello. Thanks for listening to me in this short time I have to expose my topic during this very beautiful event. I want to introduce myself a little bit. First of all, my name is Alessandra Di Gennaro. I am a pianist, so I also identify myself with the pianist as my surname. It has always been, and maybe I will never change this thing. And I'm a pianist, and maybe from now on also a researcher. And I'm recently graduated from the Royal Conservatoire. So I'm Italian, but I'm based in The Hague, in the Netherlands. I had the pleasure to meet Anotai because she was the external member of my research exposition, and we had a very pleasant discussion about my research. So I'm very happy that she asked me to participate to this symposium, because I really think that my topic fits the subject we are talking about. So the subject of my research is piano for hands, the medium and the repertoire. And before starting to talk about this, I of course tried to frame this research topic in the topic of the symposium, the traditions. So since I'm Italian, I started to think in Latin. I studied Latin in the high school. Traditions comes from Latin tradere. That means deliver, transmit, and hand down. These are the three most important meanings. So I asked myself, is piano for hands really a tradition? Has it been a tradition? Is it still a tradition? And yes, it is, because a tradition is a typical behavior of the society, in this case of music society, is an aspect of culture that has a certain degree of continuity and invariability through time. So certainly piano for hands, it's a tradition, a music tradition, at least for a Western music culture. I have to admit that my research has been really Western culture centered. I've never thought I would have given a speech to such a broad audience. So I have to be honest, my perception, my focus is really Western centered. Anyway, yes, the piano for hands has been transmitted from generation to generation through centuries, but it also suffered from some agents of change, innovation, revival, the mise. So yes, piano for hands is really a tradition. First of all, I want to explain why I was so interested in the piano for hands tradition. Which is the need of my study? Well, I am part of a piano duo, the Dirac piano duo, together with another Italian colleague, and we decided to promote contemporary music for piano for hands. So we decided deliberately not to play two pianos. We want to promote piano for hands music because it's not much played, and to be honest, the contemporary repertoire for this medium is almost unknown by the majority of people and public. So we just wanted to promote it because it's beautiful, and it has also been difficult to find repertoire, but there is a beautiful repertoire, and there is a lot of repertoire, to be honest. So another reason of my study is that when I was proposing my repertoire, it could be contemporary or not, to concert programmers, sometimes they would refuse it, because still the piano for hands is considered a sort of inferior genre in a way. This is a stigmatization that was really there a few decades ago, but still as a member of a piano duo, I can still feel that stigmatization. So I wanted to understand why this is happening. So my research questions were really that: what's happening now in the contemporary scene, in the contemporary scenario? Are there beautiful pieces of piano for hands? And what happened after this great flourishing of the 19th century, and then this sort of disappearance that we had during the 20th century? So to do so, I had to make a sort of historical contextualization of the piano for hands medium to try to understand what happened to this tradition, how it suffered from changes, and what's happening right now in the contemporary scenario. The purpose of this contribution today is to raise consciousness about the topic, so remove the stigma and make people think about it, and especially shed light on the contemporary repertoire for piano for hands, because it's really, really beautiful. It has a very very big value musically, and it really needs to be performed and enjoyed by the current public. So I want to just go for my research. Of course, I made a sort of introduction in my research talking about the origins of the medium, but now I don't have time to talk about it. So I will just start from the historical moment when the piano for hands became a very important traditional aspect of the music society, and this happened through the whole 19th century. Why? I tried during my research process to read books about it and understand why this happened. Why was it so important? Why was it so radically attached to the society of the time? Of course, this thing is linked to the role that the piano itself, the instrument, was having during that time. So we all know that in Europe, during the 19th century, every rich family had a piano in their house, and this was a very big symbol of accomplishment and power. Because of course, if you had a piano in your living room, you could invite intellectuals and pairs, and also, of course, composers, musicians, and there were gatherings, there were balls, there were concerts, but house concerts. So it was a completely different dimension if we compare it with the one we are used to. And the daughters especially, but also the sons of these rich families, they were all very accomplished with music. They were spending a lot of time behind the piano learning music, because this was a symbol of richness, of accomplishment. So if you want to marry a good rich man, you just have to be able to play the piano. So these girls, most of the time, were amateurs, but they were very good amateurs, because the word amateur has been considered very badly in the current century and also in the previous one. But amateur means someone who loves to play, and someone who does. It doesn't necessarily mean that needs to do it in a bad way. In fact, most of the daughters of these rich families, they were students from the best composers. You can see, for example, in the picture, Fauré giving lessons to a very little girl, and they were enjoying piano for hands practice. What is the nice thing of this amateur practice? That at least people were really active in making music. So if they wanted to listen to music, they just had to reproduce it, to take a score, to understand it, and to play it. And this was a very active way of purchasing music and enjoying it. We don't have to forget also that piano for hands was a socially accepted way of flirting. So in a time where it was not allowed to have privacy, a young couple could share the keyboard, but also share feelings, share a privacy moment. So it was really important, and many couples were born from this practice. And of course, there are so many books and then so many also paintings that refer to that. So what happened? Everyone was playing piano for hands, because of course, if there was, for example, a new symphony by Beethoven, then a few weeks later there was already a transcription that could be purchased in a music shop. So people were buying these transcriptions and enjoying the new music at home. And these transcriptions are not easy at all. So this witness the level of accomplishment of these ladies, of these bourgeois people which were sitting on the piano. So this tradition suffered from a very big change. Of course, the change of the world wars. So in the first decades of the 20th century, there was a very big decline of this practice, which is a pity. But of course, there are transformations that make something completely different. And as we will see, the output of this transformation is not bad at all, and it allowed the medium to evolve and to transform. So what happened after the World Wars? Of course, first of all, the role of women in society changed a lot. So they were not anymore behind the piano. They did their steps through independence finally, and it was not needed to have such a broad education and to have these so many accomplishments to find an husband. So this was the first thing. So that the rooms of these rich families were completely in silent now, because everyone was at work, everyone was trying to contribute to the society. The gramophone is also a very, very important aspect, because it allowed to listen to music in a very different way, sitting on the couch. So no one was anymore interested on making the effort to play duets anymore, because they could actually purchase a CD and listen to it, which is a very sad thing if you think about it. Of course, it's a very nice technological innovation, but from the point of view of making actively music, this is a very big change. As I wrote then, yes, from the piano bench to the concert hall. So there was one room now that was very important for listening to music, and it was the concert hall, not anymore the living room of every rich family. There was a very big stigmatization in that period of the piano for hands repertoire, because it was not considered a concert program, was considered too much linked to this amateur practice. So that was the time where very big virtuosos were sharing maybe the stage with other virtuosos, but always in a very virtuosistic repertoire. So that's why two pianos repertoire became so important. What happened after a few decades, especially from the 70s on, is that there was a renaissance of this genre. It's very difficult to understand why and how this happened, but what I did is trying to understand from which point of view that was this sort of new approach to the piano for hands. And what I found out is that this is due, first of all, to very important couples, duettists, that decided to devote their career to revitalize this very beautiful repertoire, because they believed in it and they did a very amazing job. The most important example of these duettists are Weekly and Agram Bright. They are from America. They were from America, and they actually were a couple, a husband and wife, and they decided to completely devote their pianistic careers to this piano for hands revitalization. So they wrote a lot of books. They were teaching piano for hands. They made a lot of seminars. They talked about it, and they had a very, very huge concert activity. So they demonstrated that the piano for hands repertoire can be a concert medium. And from there on, of course, this had a huge success, and many more couples started to play again. So the tradition of playing piano for hands came back, but it came back in the concert hall, and with a very nice new literature. So in the second point, I was underlining that there are many scholars that started to talk about the piano for hands. But the nice thing is that when the contemporary composers saw so many agitation, let's say, around the piano for hands, they started to compose finally new music, which was of course completely different than the old repertoire of the Romantic era, but it had also different features, because of course the piano for hands allows for a theatricality thanks to the proximity of the players that is very interesting to explore experiment on. So this is what composers like Vine is Australian, and Crump, Feldman, Felcianos, Homefield, they are Americans. They tried to play with the unique features of the medium, of the piano for hands medium, and the output of this compositional era it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful. In my research, I also tried to analyze more in detail a few pieces that are my favorites, and I'm going to play with a Dirac piano duo. I don't know if I have time to expose a little bit of that. Maybe, yeah, 2 minutes or something. One piece is by Tomohiro Moriyama. He's a Japanese composer. He composed this piece, Let's Play a Duet. It's very beautiful because he asks the players to improvise, but not only the music, but also the choreographies, the arm choreographies. So it's everything improvised, and you can really choose the movements you want to make. So I really suggest the audience to listen to it. Another very important piece is a Night by Fasil Said, a very important Turkish pianist and composer. He managed through the piano for hands medium to enhance, which is his credo, his belief, which is the merging of the West and the East culture. So he has very Turkish roots, emotional roots, but he was trained in Austria. So he wanted to combine these two cultures, and he made it through the piano for hands medium, because thanks to the possibilities of using four hands, he could use extended techniques of the piano with evocative purposes, in the sense that these techniques were evoking the Turkish hammered instruments. And this is very effective, because of course, as you can see in the picture, while a pianist is manipulating the piano inside, the other one can keep going with the harmonic part. So the result is much more efficient when you have two pianists instead of one. I don't have time to go forward, I think. So I just want to thank you. And I have a question to the audience. I realized, as I already said, that my research is very Western music centered. So I just would like to have a conversation, maybe in another moment, about what's happening in the piano for hands medium in the ASEAN music. I didn't find anything, but it would be really interesting to know which is the path that the piano for hands medium has undergone through centuries in that part of the world, which I'm completely unaware of. So I just thank you, and here there are my contacts if you want to know more about my research. So thanks.
So thank you very much, Alessandra and Napakorn. Now, I think it's a beautiful example of this type of results that we get from our students. I think two very different results and two very different initial starts to the research. I remember reading about Napakorn's initial idea to combine music with food. In fact, I think you came to my office and we had this talk, and I remember thinking, where is this going? This makes me slightly nervous. And if you see the results, it's wonderful. And I mean, yes, I'm now hungry. So, but it was a wonderful combination of these two senses, and something that I think you're just at the cusp of investigating. And there's so many more areas of this wonderful research topic that you can investigate. So well done. And Alessandra, that's a very different topic. You know, as a young pianist, I did a lot of four-hand piano music in my study, and we have an idea of the culture and the tradition of this topic, very much grounded in our understanding. And I think you have sort of taken our understanding and ideas of this tradition and sort of shook it around and changed our ideas and shown a new light on this wonderful repertoire for piano, and also by doing so have ensured its continual transformation and development. So that's a wonderful thing. I mean, if you were to mention to someone, oh, I'm doing research about, four-hand piano music, they might also think, initially, where is that going to go? And you've proven that you can take an old topic and shine a completely new light on it and turn it into something wonderful. So two very different topics, and I think a very good example of the creativity of our students. So thank you both very much for that. I'm wondering if there are any questions from the audience about my short presentation or the two presentations of our graduates.
Our audience can also put in some QA questions if you have anything to add. So that's, I'm just curious. I mean, at first when I heard about this in PGM, we are trying to run something very similar, the 3 bubbles and some of the things with the undergraduate level and also extended into the postgraduate level. But it's really wonderful to see the 4 elements. So I'm always curious of how can you manage to make all kind of bridge all these together. And it's really wonderful to have that you have the main subject teacher, research supervisors, master circle leader, and a professional integration coach. Since when did you came up with this wonderful plan, and how did you combine these plans?
Well, I think transitions and tradition are 2 words that come very much to mind when trying to answer your very complicated question. I've been in this role since 2011. And at that point, we were still thinking about just how to implement artistic research conservatorium wide, because that was something that was very present in the early music department already for a long time. But we saw the need and the desire to inspire other students to start thinking about that. So that was a long process of implementing it. And actually, there was an element of fear in the word research, but many students felt that we were asking them to do something that was totally not related to what they wanted to do with their lives, which was to be musicians and to be creative beings. And it took us a long time to really demonstrate that many of their teachers, including myself, who are successfully function in different aspects of the creative arts world, are actually walking master projects. We do research, we teach, we perform, we think about what we're doing, we write, we communicate to the audience, and it's actually it's equipping yourself with skills and tools to be successful. And what I think our 2 students today demonstrated is, students all start off from the same point. When they apply, they come in with a master plan in which they have to delineate clearly the 3 steps. They go through the 2 introductory courses, they work with the supervisor, follow the classes, and they end up completely somewhere else at the end. And that's exactly what we hope to see. So to answer your question, we're still in transition. We have a wonderful team and also a working group, several working groups who meet regularly. Paul and Renee are very much involved in all of this. And we talk about how things are going. I mean, look at the wonderful assessment that Paul made and discussed during his keynote about how students think about the curriculum. I mean, what's more important than that? We can meet and think about what we feel we want to implement and where we want students to be in a few years, but we need to hear from the students themselves what they need and what they wish to follow. So I think one of the earliest implementations, earliest changes we made was to introduce the master circle. And that remains actually one of our greatest successes, because it's a very safe environment. I'm looking at Napakorn and Alessandra, I'm sure you can jump into that. It's this area where you're safe and you can talk about your research. You can have arguments with students. You can be inspired. You can be frustrated by your fellow students. You can discover that you're actually developing very differently than other students, that you're not going down the right path, that you are going down the right path, that an idea that's keeping you awake at night is actually a really great idea that once you share it with others. So I think this shows the importance of a network, not only of supervisors and teachers and coaches, but also a network of peers. Because let's face it, even if you're a pianist and you practice, I don't know how many hours alone in your room, you need other musicians always to share with and to talk with and to communicate with. So I don't know, are there any other questions? Anyone else want to jump in?
Maybe just one thing that I should answer Alessandra about the forehand repertoires is also seen, I think it's a little bit inferior here as well. And then for people who are, if they try to kind of play it, then it's only because they're not good enough to be a soloist or on the way of being a soloist, then they're playing this kind of repertoire. But we try, and I know in many kind of like music schools, they try to use this as a kind of collaborative attempt to get the students to play together, to listen to each other. So it's changing, I hope. It's changing, I hope. And I think it's just here, like from this part, I'd like to ask my second question is, how did you create this safe environment? As you mentioned, like in the master's circle leader, I mean, how did you create all these kind of safe, are you bringing people in from outside, or how did you manage that? Like for students to fall and explore and maybe realize, as you say, that bad ideas can be great ideas.
You know, I think you just said something that's really interesting, Anata. You said that, and I'll get to your to answer your question in a minute, but you said about the forehand repertoire, that it was often for people who were not good enough to become a soloist. Well, I think if I don't even touch professional integration right now, I'm sure Renee can jump in with that. But if I think about the aspect of research, that was also in essence our dilemma in the beginning: how to convince students and also staff and teachers that doing research doesn't mean that you're not going to become a performer, but it should make you an even better performer. So it took us a while to really discover what we have in the conservatoire. So the master circle leaders that we have are teachers that have been in the building for many, many years, who have realized that actually, you know, they are artistic researchers. We have alumni who have gone and done a PhD and have come back and, you know, are able to share their stories. So we found the right people for these master circles. And once we, you know, implemented these 9 research areas that Paul came up with, we also acknowledged the strengths and the talents of the people that we have in the building and put them in the right place to be able to talk about what they know. So you're not just taking on a group of students, you're taking on a group of students who are passionate about the same thing that you are passionate about. Or in my situation, you know, I'm writing articles and doing my own research, and I can then share my own frustrations with the students, and it becomes a discussion group and not a lesson. So that is much safer, of course, because students feel they're not being judged in this hierarchical situation of teacher and student, but that in some way, in that special moment, they're on an equal level with everyone else in the room. Paul?
Just a little remark. Now it's maybe not that interesting for the audience, but you present this slide with the network, Catherine, with those 4 persons. I think we actually need to update this a bit and have a 5th person there, which is the peer student, because I think that is really part of the network, and they play an immense role in what happens during the learning trajectory. So yeah,
I totally agree.
Something I thought about.
No, that's great. It's true. And yeah, I mean, and that is so incredibly important. And I think the nicest thing about a situation that we are still in the process of creating in The Hague is that we learn from each other. You know, my job is like a gift. I mean, I said this to Anata, I think even this year at the symposium, I'm then chairperson for many of these final presentations, and following these students and watching all of these videos, I learn so much every year about areas of music that 20 years ago I wouldn't even have gone to. I mean, I've always liked jazz as an early musician, but a lot of the, sorry, Alessandra, but a lot of the more classically oriented students, I kind of didn't have so much time for. And now I'm seeing that the world is so exciting and there's so much happening there. And so for us as well as you know, coaches and supervisors and educators and teachers and mentors, we also, I mean, I'm sure Renee and Paul will agree, we learn so much from our students, which then helps us implement changes that need to be made and to continue to develop our program.
Bravo. Actually, I mean, thank you for allowing me to be a part of those things. And then I can really say that for the last 1 year or something, like from the first time until now, I can really see how the students are really improving and being able to tie in so many different areas, so many different things, and also bringing up a really important questions that's completely relevant to now. And also the video quality is getting like, oh my God, that's the production and the storytelling, the narrative of it is really amazing. So thank you so much for involving me in those areas.
Thank you for joining us. I mean, I think that's the last thing I'll say is that it's just, you know, I realize that this past year and a half has been very challenging for many people, but it's also, and it allowed us to broaden our network even more. I mean, the fact that we're all sitting here today talking with you and to your, you know, your colleagues and your public, I mean, that's a beautiful thing, and that will only continue to improve what we are trying to achieve.
Very much. So if I can ask some few questions to Alessandra, Irma, if you are around, you can turn on the camera and then let's join the ensemble. We've been doing a lot of ensembles things these last few days. So if I can ask the questions to Alessandra and Nopakon. So now that you have finished your studies, I mean, how are you applying those experience in real life? I know the situation like where you are, Alessandra, I'm not sure where you are, but for Nopakon, now that you're back in Thailand, I mean, how can we change things? How can we go forward? Sorry, this is completely improvised. So
sure. So for me, I think that curriculum at The Hague for sure encourage us to engage in other fields of studies and also the research and projects that we have done during our studies really push us as a better musicians, better artists, right? And the things that I can sense that it is true that our school really provide us the very safe environment to share our ideas, our innovative ideas, crazy stuff in the master circles and things with peers and with circle leaders. Actually, for me, I got a lot of amazing things, ideas from that circle that I am in. So I really encourage in maybe in Thailand, if we can build that bound between friends and teachers who is really engaged in the same subject, because we are now in The Hague, we divided into 9 circles, depends on the research subject, right? And that really amazing ideas, because we can share things that we are interested in with same kind of students, same group of interests. So that really provide us the very engaging circumstance to be in. So I also really wish it also happened in other institutions in Thailand too, for me.
Thank you for Nopakon. And Alessandra?
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with Nopakon. I had a very great time in the conservatoire. Yeah, I'm a little bit scared, of course, now that I'm out of that institution, because of course it has been a very safe environment in a way, but we also had the chance to step out sometimes. And well, now my plans, I'm going to stay in the Netherlands, but my dream would be to come back to Italy and to try to, with my project, to really make it grounded in the place where I was born, because actually in the Netherlands, I find the Netherlands a much more innovative place where you can really see the traditions evolving. So I'm really glad that my education was there and I really learned about it. But Italy is much more conservative. So when I try to propose, for example, Florence contemporary repertoire in Italy, it's almost impossible that they would accept that kind of program. They always ask for Fauré and Rachmaninoff and other pieces. So what I would really like to do is to make my project so strong that could convince even Italian audience. That would be my ultimate hope.
Good luck. I'm sure things are changing. Thank you. And just one thing that I pick up from Nopakon, and think in PGM we are trying similar things, but now instead of the master circles, we're using the ideas of supervisors with different kind of expertise. But maybe instead of calling a person's name, maybe if some professor would like to change their, let's say, like the topics of interest, then they can alter. So it's not just kind of fixed on the person, but it's more related to the topic. So that's really wonderful ideas. And thank you for, again, allowing me to learn from you. And then my next question would be that, do you see any possibilities of applying this to the undergraduates? Do you think it's possible? Because like in PGM, we're trying it, and I'm just really curious, do you see any prospect in the future in The Hague that this can be applied to different levels of students?
Well, I do. We did implement something called critical music studies a few years ago, and there are jazz music studies, early music studies, of which I am a teacher, and classical music studies. Okay, we don't have a focus on the 9 research areas. Maybe that would be something that we could consider, but these lessons are primarily intended to help students think about why they do certain things. So in early music studies 3, for instance, that I give, you know, I challenge them by, you know, playing videos that they might not agree with and asking them why they dislike something or why they like something or what traditions have been passed down by their teachers. And if they, you know, ask them to challenge some of these preconceived notions that they have. So it's a way of already, you know, creating an environment where they can feel safe to think differently and to challenge, you know, some of these notions that we have. So that's a way that we've implemented it. And, you know, the research catalog has already been implemented in the bachelor so that students familiarize themselves with that. So the whole sort of ethos of research, artistic research has been implemented, and, you know, also professional integration. I mean, Renee can maybe say something a little bit about that, your boot camp and other things. This is sort of the way of pushing students out the door and getting them already to be creative and develop, you know, different skills. Would you like to say something about the boot camp, maybe, Renee?
I was just about to jump into to say that, yes. As we speak, next week, 120 second-year bachelors will be kicked out the door of our institution to develop small projects in society, in a particular neighborhood, in the most various kinds. But it is basically about teaching them professional skills, learning to become entrepreneurial, to take risks, to engage, to connect to different contexts, and to collaborate with students that not necessarily have the same background as you have. So that's another example, and it's sort of it's mind setting to have this experience, and they will take it with them for the other years in their bachelors. So it's an example.
That's nice. And I heard briefly that you say that it's students from different departments. Am I right?
Yes, they have subscribed for a specific context. Students that want to work in an elderly home, or on a cemetery, or in a boxing school, or in a horse stable. And then, to their surprise, they find they may be a jazz student, and they find a harpsichord player there, or a classical singer. And so they have to find a way to become a team, which is part of the experience. But it's nice. I'm looking forward to it.
It's rewarding, I'm sure. Thank you. Rewarding not only for the student, but for the teachers as well. And you can really prove whether music can be a medium of words and everything. It's really the place to explore that. Yes, we have one questions from in the chat. May I ask, what is the priority when you select students in the audition?
If I could just start, I would say the first thing is the application procedure. Two of my colleagues are at this moment completing a animation video with instructions about how to write the master plan, we call it master project plan. There's also a lot of written information. That is the plan that students come in with, that should describe in detail how they are hoping to, you know, explore these three aspects. So what artistic development would they like to see themselves go through in 2 years? What research topic would they like to investigate? And what are their ideas about professional integration? So they have to write a plan that is then assessed, not as good or bad, but if students only fill in 2 sections, then they'll get the recommendation that they need to spend more time on the third. If it's too general, then they'll be asked to specify. So that's the first step. They have to fill in the application. They have to really clearly describe who they are and what they hope to achieve in the 2 years. And after that, they're invited for the audition. And then that's left to a panel of teachers and the head of a department to assess that. That goes beyond our responsibilities.
I see. And may I ask something, follow my colleagues' questions? Pisha is another lecturer who's helping me with the contextual studies in PGIM, so we are working as double here. Just one question about the main subject teacher. I mean, how are you communicating with them? How can you sort of like make them realize that this is not a danger to their students, but this is a part to help them realizing better what they do? Not just what, but how and why, something like that.
Oh, would you like to say something about that?
Well, actually, I'm not that much involved in that process, but we have had many discussions about this, of course, and I think that what at least we try to do now is to increase the involvement of the main subject teacher within the whole master project. And well, I don't know exactly what is being decided now or what kind of plans are in the making, but it's definitely one of the ambitions to make these connections stronger and to give them also a bigger role. Actually, this already happened to some extent, like in the, maybe Anota, you also witnessed this in the Master Symposium. For the first time we had like suddenly also teachers, main subject teachers, sometimes in the jury, or and that indeed it's not an easy process. We have to be honest about this. It's sometimes it leads to a kind of positions that are very far away from what we were thinking about, but that's part of the process, I would say, and it's not so that we have to. I think we then I mean the working group that tries to tune this process, that we try to force this, for instance, the main subject teacher in our vision or something like this. It's rather that we invite them to participate in this process, and we also have to learn from that and adapt the process. And so it's the same like what we talked. We discussed about students, so it's that whole process is goes in 2 directions. But René can tell something more about this, maybe.
Yeah, well, I want to respond to a question I see in the chat. What the priority is when we select students in the audition, and of course, first thing always is level, especially, for instance, for master students. Do they have in their specific discipline, let's say, the minimum requirement for the level? But there's a tendency to prioritize. The next priority is the motivation and the amount of being self-driven with the students. That is becoming, because we put so much responsibility more and more to the students to choose their pathway and to take risks and to research and to question. That there needs to be a certain amount of motivation and self-efficacy, or being self-driven, which has become more and more important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yes, and Irma, you mentioned you were raising hands. Yes.
Yes, I was just thinking that within the conservatory in The Hague, as a teacher, you have lots of opportunities to do research yourself. That's why I started doing my research, so that you can actually experience what it does and what a master circle does, and how important it is to meet peers also within the circle of teachers. inspire each other. And I think those opportunities that are given to teachers are also incredibly important for the main subject teachers to see something is happening here and it's really positive. And I, as a main subject teacher, also enjoy this, doing research and being part of a master circle and presenting work and outcomes.
Thank you. That's really, really, yes, Katrin?
It's definitely a trickle-down effect. Thank you, Irma, for jumping in, because that's very true. I mean, if we have teachers who are inspired and who are aware of the benefits of, you know, our triangle, then they will inspire their students to do the same thing. And I think, you know, Paul described the situation this year in the Master Symposium. I remember two or 3 years ago, I was in one of our big studios, and a very famous jazz saxophone player who was a teacher, who I had very little contact with, could never get him to come to the symposium, happened to show up for his students' presentation and sat way in the back. And after the presentation, I said to this professor, excuse me, do you have a question? He said, why didn't I know about this? This was wonderful. So, you know, that's what we hope to eliminate, that, you know, this lack of awareness. And if we inspire our teachers to think, to realize that they are themselves, you know, master projects, they will,
yes.
will be a trickle-down effect, and hopefully they will inspire their students as well.
Thank you. Irma?
Yeah, and also the sharing of the research in the research catalog is very interesting.
Yes.
And because all the research is in there, so as a teacher, but also as a student or an outsider, you can read it and share work. And it's really amazing what students come up with. It's very inspiring.
Thank you. It works so well. So congratulations for research catalog. It's been part of my class already. So it is one of the assignments that our student has to go and see that. So thank you. And also Nopagon also came and give a talk as well to our master students as well. It seems like we have another question. Oh yeah, just thank you. In that case, thank you so much for all these. I think a student is the best ambassador in some way, just not only ambassador for people outside to know about your work, but also ambassador to the major teacher as well. I mean, we found in many occasions that the main subject teachers are finding like all these kind of projects intriguing because of the students telling a very good story. So I think that I also leave this to some of the students here that are attending the class. So you are all the ambassadors, and thank you so much for Royal Conservatoire de Hague for the wonderful sessions you have given us, and a lot of lessons I've learned throughout the years of knowing you and then learning from all your students. So thank you very much, and I'm sure this is not be the last time. I hope that we will meet again and this kind of thing. And then, okay, so thank you. Have a good lunch. Have a good evening. And for us, our audience can also find the link to our next sessions in the chat. And the next session will be a discussion prior to a theme made by one of my good colleagues, Sean David, who's reflecting the story of the music in the Philippines and the ideas of decolonizations and how he transposed through those times. Then story of the composer Ramon Santos. So I'll see you there, hopefully. And then tomorrow, it will be almost the last day of our symposium. So in the morning, we will have all these young generations of people in Southeast Asia coming to tell a story, sharing ideas. So like tomorrow is limited to 30 years old under. We will only be able to ask questions but not speaking. And then the afternoon, we have some people from Google and TikTok who's working already in kind of music and interdisciplinary coming to speak to us. So thank you so much again for the family from The Hague. Thank you. Have a good lunch. And then wish you all the best with everything you do. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.